Hello, SPC. Good to be with you again this week. I hope you are all holding up okay during these difficult and uncertain times. I also hope that you're taking the time to read our weekly e-blast and visiting our website, spcah.org, to keep up with what's happening at SPC. Our building may be closed, but the church is much more than that, as we know. It's how we connect and relate to each other, God, and our larger world. And so the big news, though, that I want to share with you right now is that worship is moving to video. We are going video this week and for the ongoing future. And so you'll get to see our lovely faces every week. And I'm really excited about it. I'm looking forward to it. And this is the future right now. And it will be as we move ahead. I think it's important to stay connected and to see people's faces because life is more of a struggle than usual right now for many. People are suffering in so many different ways right now. When we hear stories about this all the time, we hear stories about the economic and health-related suffering right now. But I'm also finding that there are those who have had to continue working and that there are those who are working harder than usual despite the dangers of COVID-19. And they're suffering too right now. And so they all need to be in our prayers. We need to be thinking and remembering all of them. And in the presence of so much suffering, I have to admit, it's not uncommon to begin asking, why is God letting this happen? Where is God in all of this? In other words, why is God letting us suffer? Why is God putting us through this? You know, the issue of God and human suffering has been a topic of interest going all the way back to Job, the book of Job being probably the oldest book in the Bible. Pastors and theologians have wrestled with this question for centuries, if not millennia. We even phrase it differently, hoping it will make the issue of God and human suffering either more palatable or easier to address. Like the Rabbi Herod Kushner asks the question, why do bad things happen to good people? C.S. Lewis explored the problem of pain. The theologian Wendy Farley saw the tragic nature of it and cast a tragic vision and divine compassion. You know, I think the issue of God and human suffering is probably the hardest and yet most important issue for the church today. Mainly because it's such a personal issue for all of us. I mean, so often the way we feel about God and human suffering is connected intimately to our own awareness and our own experiences of suffering. That's why I think this issue more than most either draws or repels people to the faith. I mean, for some, there is a great comfort in the cross and knowing that God suffers right alongside in solidarity with others. For some, knowing that our suffering isn't the end and that someday we'll be with God in heaven living a suffering-free life is all the hope they need to endure suffering now. For others, though, this isn't enough. They see the suffering of our world and can't reconcile it with the fact that we talk about an all-powerful and all-knowing and an always-present God and how that God would willingly let them suffer. The fact is, suffering is a hard thing that leaves some deep, deep wounds. And sure, sometimes we can learn and grow from our suffering. But other times, suffering doesn't make sense because there's nothing to be gained from it. It's undeserved, it's ongoing, and it's just so tragic in nature. Systemic types of suffering, like racism, poverty, and other forms of injustice often fit this type of suffering. The bottom line is the issue of God and human suffering isn't easily addressed. I mean, even the most perfect answer or the most logical argument just isn't enough. We want to know why this is happening to us. And we want to know that we're not going through it alone. And no answer or argument is good enough to alleviate the need, our need, to wrestle with our suffering, the suffering of others, and why God is allowing this to happen. You know, suffering, like it or not, is a reality of being human. We all probably know that. There isn't one human being who hasn't had the experience of suffering. So I suppose in that sense you could say that there is unity in our suffering. And that's where I think our faith has a lot to say despite not giving us easy answers to this issue. In fact, the story of faith, believe it or not, is actually incomplete without suffering. We can't talk about humanity's creation, fall, or redemption without talking about suffering, God's or our own. And the fact is, we need to be talking more about the suffering of our world. And we need to be talking more about God, where God is in all of that suffering. So this Sunday, we're going to be starting a new sermon series called God in Human Suffering. And the series is based on the book of the same title that was written by renowned theologian Douglas John Hall. And each week we'll be looking at a different part of the story of faith and what it has to say about how suffering can coexist with a loving and just God. We'll also take a closer look at the church's role as a community of suffering and, more importantly, of hope. I think it should be a great series and a very timely one as well, and I really hope that you enjoy it. In the meantime, I want to encourage you to wrestle with a couple of questions on your own. First, how well do you deal with your suffering and the suffering of others? And second, what happens if we refuse to acknowledge or engage our suffering or the suffering of others? Again, I hope you enjoy this series, and I encourage you to be in conversation with those around you and others, whether it be in person, online, or even via Zoom or FaceTime or Google Hangouts or Skype as we move through this series. I think it's going to be really important that you have people around you and that you're talking about this issue as we work through it. Well, it's great to be with you again, Southminster. Please have a blessed and safe week.